Yes.
Thank you, Raquel. I'm Tom. I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be sober, grateful to be part of this group tonight and participate with you guys' process. It's a fascinating process, and I think it's probably the most important subject in all of history is the subject of God. And I'm excited to have my daughter, Teryn, who celebrated 1 year in March. It's her second 1 year sober, but I've had the privilege of being able to witness her journey through life for over 43 years. That's a lot of years.
It's 28, Dad. 28 years.
And to see her curiosity and her commitment and I know that, Teryn, I know that you really like and appreciate structure, especially the service structures that the 12-step communities have in place. And we were talking about, we're in another Zoom meeting on Tuesdays, and began the process in the We Agnostics chapter. And so we talked about this paragraph. And Teryn lives in Kansas City, Missouri. She came out of Colorado. She was I've got two daughters. Both of them are in the process of what we do, and both of them, were directly hit by the shrapnel of my alcoholism and addiction. And our line on page 18 that warped lives of blameless children couldn't apply more aptly. You'll get to know this as you hear her. You'll probably be thinking to yourself, warped for sure.
For sure warped.
Anyway, Teryn, what are your earliest memories of the reason why I say that God is the most important subject? It is the thing that has been talked about, written about, spoken about as a subject more than anything else in the history of humankind. Yeah. It is that, and it shows up everywhere. It is in the earliest literature. The literature folk from Sumeria and Egypt, the first literate writings we have, it's about God, and it's about God and existence. So Teryn, and I know that we've been, a religious household, not necessarily always spiritual, but religious and maybe spiritual for the last, for a period of time. But what were your first impressions and experiences of God and higher powers and divinity?
Start with, I'm Teryn. I'm an alcoholic. I was thinking about this earlier today. My first memory of religion, not just God, but of religion, was sitting in a church with you and Mom. And I don't remember where the church was. For me, it was a very long drive. It seemed way out in the country. And I was an angel in the choir at Christmas. And I remember very vividly being in that church. I think my first recollections of God would probably be from Grandma and being in her household. Usually it was a reference to something that had happened in Mass, or it was yelling at one of you kids and saying a bad word with the word God in it. But I know from a very young age that God was important in our household and in our family. And I think my first understanding of what God felt like was, I remember being in Chicago at Nana's. I don't know how old I was, but I remember we were at Debbie's house, and I remember I had made the gravy, I had messed the gravy up, and Debbie was so wonderful about it. But then we all sat down for Thanksgiving dinner, and the way that the family prayed together and all came together, like it was chaos. You get all of us together, it's chaos. And then we came together and prayed, and it was very quiet and calm. And it wasn't like a scary quiet or calm where you're afraid an adult's going to yell at you because you messed up the gravy, but it was just really nice. And I remember that still to this day at being at Debbie's house for Thanksgiving, and the prayer that, the prayer. I don't remember exactly what was said, but I remember how I felt.
Nice. Yeah, that's a nice introduction. So throughout your life, you had to deal with lots of stuff. Like I know that your mom has told me that the straw that broke her back, as far as wanting to be married to me, was the time when I had we were at the country club, and I passed out, and you had to get us home, and your sister, and I think you were probably 8 at the time, so that made Brycey sit 2, and that Brycey somehow got hurt, and you were when mom came home, your mom came home, she said she found you sleeping by the door crying.
Yeah.
How did those things feel?
Honestly, there was a lot of fear at that time and a lot of loneliness. Fear that I had disappointed mom by letting Brycey get hurt. Fear that I had let you get in trouble by not, getting you home safer or getting us everybody home safer. So it was a lot of fear, but a lot of loneliness, and I couldn't protect Bryce. I couldn't keep mom from getting mad at you. And I thought that in turn, because you were passed out, Bryce was hurt, this was my fault. She was going to be mad at me. And, she was mad at you, but I was very young. So I took that as I was in trouble too. Those were hard times. And I don't know if it's because I'm the oldest, you would probably understand this, but you got to protect everybody in the house, especially from moms, because moms can get mad. I know, because I am a mom and I get mad. But you want to make sure that everybody, that the anger is directed at you. So it felt very lonely. And, we had stopped going to church as much at that point. And I think, because right after mom left, after all of that, mom had told us we couldn't be a part of the Catholic Church because she had understood something about divorced people not being allowed to be a part of the Catholic Church. And that kept me out of the Catholic Church for a long time, or felt like I didn't belong. Once again, I didn't belong, and I couldn't protect the family.
So you went through Catholic schools for your education, and you ended up in high school, and you did really well in sports and there. At that point, did you have a relationship with God? Did you have a spiritual life?
I did. And I want to say that, I went to mass because it was the day in high school we got to wear a dress and shoes and look really cute and not have to wear like the exact uniform. So I loved mass for that reason. But I also liked all of the students coming together. I liked when all the students came together, and I liked being one of the best athletes because I got highlighted a lot. But I think the person in high school I had 2 really important moments in high school that were religiously impactful. My freshman year of high school, I started I was at St. Mary's, and, 2 years earlier, I had a friend die in a plane crash. He died, his brother died, and his father died. And their mom was actually the principal of my elementary school. And so I was really struggling with the God concept. And I asked the religion teacher, because they were Jewish, if he was going to go to heaven. I'm 14, I think I'm grown, but I'm still asking very childlike questions. And she told me probably not, because they don't believe in heaven, or they don't have a belief that heaven's not their belief format. So that's not what they believe in. And, I took that as, well, he's not going to heaven. I'm never going to see him again. Because again, I'm still very childlike and I'm still scared. And, then I was really upset, and, it was before track practice, and I went to track practice that afternoon, and I had the best track coach in the world. His name is Ed Latimer. And, I told him what she said, and I told him I hated her. I hated the school. I didn't want to be there anymore. And, he talked to me about it, and he said, Teryn, I don't think that you understand what she's saying, that we all get to have different beliefs, and their belief system doesn't include the traditional Catholic version of heaven. And maybe that's something we should think about, is what would be his version of heaven? And can you go visit that version of heaven? And I stuck very close to Coach Latimer after that. And he prayed before all of our meets. He would have us pray before we ran. And, a lot of the times it was like, as I got older, it was like, well, I'm too cool for this. I know I'm good because I'm good. I'm fast. And now looking back, I can see where God was with me at school and in track and in volleyball and basketball, because we had great coaches that brought it in. Whether we wanted it or not, our coaches always brought it into us. So it was always there for me. And sometimes I'd reach out to it. And sometimes I was a self-obsessed egomaniac teenager who thought she was the coolest thing on the planet. So I didn't always need God.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I know that both you and Bryce, your sister, paid attention to what was going on. And for me, my life was this story of like building up this huge life, and with lots of, I was the finance chair for the Diocese of Colorado, the Catholic Diocese of Colorado. I sat at the bishop's right hand as a finance counselor, finance advisor for 5 years. And I was very involved. That church you talked about out on Woodman Road, Our Lady of St. Francis. Your mom and I taught Sunday school there. And, we would go to mass, and I know I had times of consolation, but at the same time, all this is going on. Starting about, 12 years before I get sober, I start getting arrested a lot. I start having DUIs, and I start getting picked up, and I start having all that stuff happen. And then I know that you got to witness, firsthand this stuff. In fact, the man that was become your husband and the father of your two oldest children, you were on your first date with him. And, when I had been apprehended by some bounty hunters at my house, and you were driving by my house, and there was a fire engine, an ambulance, and several police cars, because I was hogtied in the front yard being handed over from the bounty hunters to the police. And you guys came running up across the lawn to see what was going on. And here I am trying to, be the dad. And it's hard to when your legs are tied to your feet behind your back. But I gave him the look.
Yeah, he was terrified. You weren't afraid to go back to jail. He knew
that. But when all that was going on, like the dogs would get taken, and all the stuff was going on at my house, and I end up on this journey where I get because I was always I would consider not God-centered, but God aware, and God appreciative, maybe even God fearing, but knowing that God was the source and center of the universe. So much so that when I had that psychotic experience where the dead members of the Grateful Dead visited me, my role was to help God fix the world. And so then I became psychotic, and I started to become this, thinking I'm becoming Jerry Garcia, and I'm doing all the stuff I do, chopping down telephone poles, chopping holes in the roof, setting up shrines to honor my daughter on her way to
Everybody can feel the secondhand embarrassment right
now. But when you knew that I had gone to India, and I had met Mother Teresa, and I had met the Dalai Lama, and I was seeing you guys at church on your Wednesdays when I go to mass and see you guys there. What were you thinking then? What were you thinking about God then? And were you praying at that point?
I was, and I've learned now that I was praying. I didn't know I was praying. I was having conversations, trying to understand what is going on in my life and why it is this way, because, during that time, my mom was also, that right before all of that, my mom was pregnant with triplets, very high risk pregnancy. So I was worried about her. You were starting to go off your rocker. So I was worried about you. Bryce was a pain in my butt 90% of the time. So I wasn't really worried about her, but I was annoyed by her. And I couldn't understand, because I would see my friends, and they had these families, not all of them, but most of them had these families that had a mom and a dad, and the mom and the dad would have dinner with their families, or I wouldn't say they were necessarily religious, even though we all went to a Catholic school, but they did the right things. And on Easter morning, they were there with their kids, and you saw them with their parents. And I was always wondering what I had done or what I needed to do to have a family experience. And now I know that the family experience I had is mine, and it's uniquely mine. And I don't know if I would change it now. It's been really rough a lot of the times, but it's been really good, and we find really good spots in it. I think what I was doing more is I was looking for something. You did a very good job of having information available for me. In your house, you had, and I know everybody's going to find this hard to believe, but you had thousands of books, and I had access to all these books. And one of the books that really resonated with me was this book about birthdays. And I started to understand there was more to God than religion and what I was learning in religion class. I knew there was something in Mass because you could feel it in Mass. It's quiet. I would get bored. Sometimes the boy I liked wouldn't look back at me when I looked at him, but there was always something special. And, you could feel it when they'd bring the gifts down. Everybody kind of stills a little bit, and, everybody's looking at who's bringing the gifts, but it's a little bit stiller. And then when the father is preparing the host and the wine for communion, everything gets a little quieter. And then when you stand up, when I was in school, we used to hold hands and say Our Father. And then we would say, Peace be with you. And that was my favorite moment in Mass, was when we would hold hands and say the Our Father. And then we would say, Peace be with you, because it just felt like for a few minutes, everybody was on the same plane and we were all doing something together, which you don't have in life today a lot.
Yep. I'm going to give a little bit of background on when I got sober. When I got sober, it was in 2001. And one of the big things that happened for me, I always knew that there was God, and I always believed that God could show up for people. I just didn't believe God could show up for me. And what happened for me, I was probably 2 weeks sober. One of them, the ones I was 10 days sober, and I got to hear Terry talk, and Terry was on here, or he's on here. I can't see him right now, but he told a story, and that really got me connected. And his story gave me the awareness that somehow miracles are taking place, because he was a miracle. That he was sober was a miracle, and I kind of became aware of that because I had been religious, and I had studied God, and I had studied religion from many different perspectives. And so Terry's one of the first people I became aware of that had kind of experienced this transformation that I started to hear about in the rooms. And then I started, when I got to you guys, I was completely beat into a state of reasonableness. I had tried to kill myself, and I'd failed. There was nothing left. I was completely out of ideas, options, everything. I was a fugitive from the state of Colorado. I had 5 warrants, and I didn't really care about that, but it didn't matter because I'm just going to get loaded anyway. So that's what I knew. And I think so. Terry, at about 45 days sober, I got to hear a lady named Patty O speak, and Patty told her story. And in their story, she read part of a pamphlet, and the pamphlet she read from was the Members' Eye View of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she read a couple parts, but the part that really got me was at the end, because it quotes the Judeo-Christian scripture, and it's the quote when John the Baptist sends an emissary to ask Jesus, "Are you the one that's coming?" And Jesus says, "Tell him what you're seeing." And he says, and what you're seeing is, the lame are walking, the blind are seeing. And when I heard that, it's kind of like, yeah, those are miracles. And because by that point, I was starting to become aware that there were people getting sober, and that they lived like I did, and that they were as hopeless as I was. And I knew in my hopelessness that there was no way I could change. And yet somehow, not only were they changing, but they were becoming kind of like profound in my eyes. They were, because I would go to these meetings and I would hear all of you talk, and you would talk, in a way that didn't make sense because it carried so much wisdom. And the wisdom was because you weren't talking about skipping rocks over the surface of the pond. You were fishing in the deep end, and you were finding some big catches. And you were talking about the catches. And when you talked about the catches, it was like my heart would light up. And I just really got on board with this thing. So what I wanted to ask you, Teryn, was, you got to see some of that stuff because you were at Cal Poly Pomona, and when I got brought out here to Dana Point, and I'm in this halfway house, and you would come down and see us this halfway house, and what did you think about it at that time? What was going on in your mind?
I want to say this tactfully, but I was very cautious. I was cautious of this actually working. The only thing I'd ever heard about any 12-step program was when Mom and you would argue and you would talk about that you had gone to a meeting before and it wasn't for you. They didn't have what you wanted. And so, and then we had gone to rehabs before and I'd seen the 12 steps. I had no idea. I didn't understand. And so I was cautious. To me, this is like, I'm only seeing a couple of sober people with any amount of sober time. And then I'm seeing a bunch of newcomers, and all the newcomers are still crazy. And now I understand that. And I understand what was going on in the house and why you guys were acting the way you were acting. But I'm 18. I just want you to be sober. So I was very cautious. And again, that thread of fear just runs through my life. I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew something was different about you, but I don't think I was willing to believe it was, because you talked about Patio and all of those guys, and, you do hear these people and you do hear them talk about it. And I think when I first got sober, I had seen you do it. I had seen all these other people do it. People who I have a lot of respect for still to this day that I think are incredible people. I'd seen you all do it. And I'd heard you guys talk about God, but I think I was still really angry at God. And I was afraid to ask, again, fear. I was afraid to ask how you manage that relationship to start talking to God. And it took me I didn't get it the first time around. I was sober for 7 years purely on the fact that I was doing service work and going to meetings. But I still couldn't get that God piece. And I was so jealous of anybody that had it. So you got it very quickly. I didn't. I was still angry. I think I still had this big resentment against God. And I couldn't understand how to pray. I couldn't understand how to even think about it. And I saw you do it. So I thought, if you could do it, I could do it. So why wasn't I able to do it? This time around, though, I got it. I got it very quickly with God this time because I told God the night before I got sober. I drank the rest of like this much of a handle of Captain Morgan because I always like to go out on really crappy alcohol. And I took a handful of pills and I told God, here's the deal. If I wake up, then I will deal with you and we will do this. I'll go get sober and I'll figure out how to talk to you. And if I don't, well, then I don't have to worry about you anymore because I know where I'm going and it's not up there. And, I woke up the next morning and I was not happy that I woke up. I was really angry. And it was, I said some bad words to God. I actually shared this last week at a recovery home that I carry the message to. And somebody got really offended that I said I cussed out God, but I did. But you know what? I walked into a meeting and I was okay. And that's when I was like, okay, I think I'm starting to get my conception of God. And that's what I told the newcomer. I was like, dude, you're sitting in here. You have a week of sobriety and you're still shaking. I can cuss at my God. My God's okay with it. You might not be able to cuss at your conception of God, but my God and I have had a long 10 years of this fight, even longer than that, 43 years of this fight, that I know that I can have the conversations I need to have and not feel bad or guilty about the way and that's probably what it was. I think I felt a lot of guilt that I didn't pray the way that you prayed, or, Nana prayed, or, Patty O prayed. I couldn't understand that type of prayer until I got my own way of praying.
So I'm curious, because this has really been powerful for me to listen to this, because we've not really ever gone this route talking about like this. So at about 6 months sober, I was working the program. I was having my own experiences, and God was showing up in my life and awakening me to this process. And I was kind of in the 9-step world, and I came to Colorado knowing that I was a fugitive, and you took me to Arapahoe County and to the correctional facility there, and to turn me in. So there's a couple things I want to ask about. One is what it felt like when you turned me in there, and when you dropped me off there. Then what it was like when you visited. And then the last thing is several of the times, and I'll talk more about the appearances before the judges, but what it felt like when you heard the judges say whatever it is they were saying to me.
So I think anybody who's a child of an addict or an alcoholic can relate to this. You had told me you were going to be in there for a week. And so when my dad tells me something,
I thought I was.
I believed it. I thought, he's going to be in here for a week. It's not a big deal. Whatever. I was annoyed because we had left California. I'd come back with you. We were out there for Christmas break, and you decide to go turn yourself in because you're having this religious experience. And, I'm like, this is going to cut into my plans. So I'm annoyed I have to take you up there. You were still smoking cigarettes. And if anybody doesn't believe me, he used to smoke cigarettes. And we get there, and you got angry with me, and you're like, make sure that these cigarettes don't get thrown away and they're right where I left them and you don't touch them. And I'm like, so now I'm annoyed, and I'm like, okay, if this is a week-long process, why are you making it a big deal? And I remember we walked in there, and they couldn't find anything. And I was like, I think I was really confused. Because I was like, okay, well then there's nothing wrong, and you've made all this, you're still making stuff up in your head, I think is what I was feeling, is you're making this up in your head. You're insane. You probably read it in the newspaper that you had 5 warrants, and you're not actually going to jail. You're just insane still. And then they cuffed you, and it was like, okay, this is not new territory for us. For me to see you being handcuffed is not new territory. But it was, I never liked it. It was kind of like, really, you think he's a flight risk? Like, come on, guys. He's wearing a sweater. And then I think it was I don't think we went to the first appearance, because I think we all thought it was just I was going to be coming to pick you up later. So we didn't go to the first one. And, I was at one of the nightclubs, because Justin's family owned nightclubs and I would work at them. And I was at one of the nightclubs, and Jim told me that you weren't going to be getting out anytime soon. And I think that there was a lot of that confusion of, well, what do you know? He's getting out today. I'm going to pick him up later. And then I remember I was really angry, because my plans now are I'm staying in Colorado Springs, because I'm not going to leave until you get out of jail, because I still didn't trust you. Because what you forgot to mention when you got taken to California to go to sober living was that Uncle Denny handed you to me in Pomona, like basically like, he's your problem now. Good luck. And I think I was scared if I left that you would get out and you'd end up in Tijuana. Because that's my experience with you. You go in somewhere, you get out, and you disappear for a month. And I also was very scared about the people that would come visit you. So I don't know if you realize that I visited you on most of the visitation. I would like sign up before anybody else could, because I was afraid that the old drug friends were going to come visit you, and that they were going to be the ones that were going to come visit you. And, once again, there's me trying to protect you when you didn't need my protection. But, in my mind, I'm going to keep you away from yourself. But I remember that they were hard. The visits were hard. And I was just trying to navigate the best way to go in there and not be scared of what was going to happen. The judges were harder. I was only 18 at that point. I'd only been doing some scandalous stuff. I hadn't really gotten into my scandalous era. So I still had a massive amount of respect for judges. Those are the guys that hold everything in their hands. I think the first time that you kind of got told off, it was, I don't know if this is real or if this is just how my mind remembers it. I remember it being a very dark courtroom, but there was windows and the wood was very, very dark. And it was very it's an older style courtroom is one of the ones I remember. And that was the one where he kind of read you the riot act. And I was like, this is not good. This is bad. And I've watched enough movies to know what's going to happen to him in prison. And I didn't think that you were going to go become a prison boyfriend or something, but it was more of the fact that I knew that the drugs were going to happen in prison. And I didn't think that there was any way for you to, I didn't understand what the steps had given you at 6 months of sobriety. So I didn't know that you had this, toolkit and this secret weapon that you could use in jail to not do the drugs. So I was, that was one of the hardest ones. I remember he was an older gentleman, he had gray, dark hair with salt and pepper sprinkled through it, whatever. And I remember thinking, I really don't like this guy. And he's just being a jerk to my dad for no reason other than he wants to prove a point. I understand the drug court a little bit better now, but it was just devastating. It was like, okay, well, cool. Now I don't have my dad, who I thought I was finally getting back. You're gone. And, there was words like 15 years in prison. And, there was talk of, cause you were being moved around too. So that was hard. And it was like, well, how am I going to go back, or how am I going to help Bryce understand that we're still good people, even though our dad's in prison? And that was another big one was, my dad's going to be in prison. What are people going to think about me? Because I am very selfish and self-centered.
Mm-hmm. But thank you for that. Yeah. And I'm going to throw this in because I had a very powerful God experience when I turned myself in. Teryn got to see kind of the piece, but the inside part is I was in a process of the transformation that's promised by the steps. And I turned myself in knowing that I was doing the 9th step. I knew that I needed to get right with the state of Colorado and the people of Colorado because I was a fugitive and I had DUIs number 6 and 7. So I had 2 warrants for those. And I had a bunch of felony drug charges, and those were the other 3 warrants. And they were no bond warrants. They were not going to let me go because I had missed so many things. And when I got in front of that first judge, you weren't there, because there was a stipulation that I would be doing 14 days. It was 2 weeks. I had already pled guilty, just didn't show up for the sentencing. And the judge threw that out. He tore it out. That was the judge you're talking about. And so the next time when he finally reconsidered my sentence, he read me the riot act. In fact, he said, if you cause an accident and anybody dies, I hope it's you. That's what he said to me.
Yeah.
After all the prison term threats and stuff. And then, so he sentences me to, he says, I'm not doing the stipulation. The most I can sentence you to is a year. So I want to put you in a year into the maximum security facility of my facility. And so you're going to be there. It's 23-hour-a-day lockdown, because that's all I can do right now. And then when you're done here, you're going to go off and take care of this other stuff. And so being moved around was they would take me to all the different counties I had charges in. And I'd have to make appearances there. But after about 6 days, I was bummed because I was listening to you people in meetings, and you were talking about doing 7 days and 2 weeks, and that how God had showed up, and and here I am locked down for 23 hours a day, knowing I'm doing the 9th step, and I know the steps that follow are continue to take personal inventory, sought to improve my relationship with God, and carry this message. And I'm thinking, how am I going to carry this message when I'm locked down 23 hours a day? And I'm bummed. I'm thinking I should have gone to Costa Rica or Australia. I used to think that, and And I prayed on the sixth day I was in there, and I prayed. I said, God, just give me a sign that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing here. And the next morning, a chaplain opens the door up, and he throws a Bible and a meditation book in. And the meditation book, and there happened to be two other guys in the cell with me. And we each got meditation books, and there was one Bible for us to share. And the meditation book for that day said, read Romans 12:14. So I opened up to Romans 12:14. It says, bless those that persecute you. Bless them and do not curse. Well, I was not blessing those that had persecuted me, and I was doing some cursing. It said, bless them, give up your conceit and be with people of low position. And I kind of looked at the other guys while I'm reading this, and I'm thinking, boy, I'm with the people of low position for sure. And it caught my attention because I knew I had prayed. I was awake to the fact that I had prayed. And I was awake to the fact that I was in there doing God's work. And I knew that the work of the steps is a spiritual process. And one of the things in the 9th step is, the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. And I knew that I was on that path. And something started to happen in me as I read this stuff. And I started to recognize that, I had prayed, and here's this thing that comes, this next signal I'm getting. I'm getting some evidence from the universe. And so I just read the next verse, and the next verse is verse 13. It says, the authorities are in place to carry out my will. My prayer was, just give me a sign I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I knew that I was right where I was supposed to be. And then it's almost as if God filled me with peace and courage, and I got transformed in that place. I got transformed, and I became more free in that lockdown facility than I had ever been in my entire life, more than I could have ever dreamed of. And that became my experience for the rest of the time that I was in there, and other things started to happen. The next judge I went through, this was the 15-year, this was one of the 15-year, was on the table. That was what they were going to give me. And so when I went in front of him on a writ, and I said, and I had, what I did that morning, and I had been doing it before, is I planned a script of how I was going to speak to the judge and how I was going to offer respect and all this stuff, and how I was going to make some justification for that I shouldn't be locked up for 15 years because, AA needs me. And so this script is what I've got in mind, and I get put in the holding cell in the jail, in the courthouse before the hearing. And I work at Mike's script over with a couple of the guys that I've been transported there with, and they're saying, boy, this is good stuff. Yeah, he's going to like this. This is really good stuff. And I practice it, and I get up and I plead guilty, and the judge says, you have anything to say? And I get ready to deliver my pitch, and it's like something grips my throat, and I never typically have a problem speaking. I usually can come up with stuff, and it's like God got a hold of my throat and shut me up. And I couldn't talk, and I'm trying to talk, and then my attorney starts to get a little nervous, and he kind of she nudges me a bit, and I'm not able to talk, and then all of a sudden, what comes out of my throat is, Your Honor, I'm sorry, and that was not my script. It says, Your Honor, I'm sorry I've wasted your time, and I'm sorry I've wasted the state of Colorado's time. I'm willing to do whatever it is you have in mind, and I shut up, and he kind of looked at me, he shook his head. And he banged the gavel and he says, time served. And that became kind of the way it kind of worked with the court system, although it wasn't always like that. There was one hearing where they agreed to everything I had, but the judge got a little harsh with me, and they put the shackles on me and the handcuffs. And both Teryn and Brycey, they jump up and they start screaming and crying in the courtroom. And the judge says, no, it's okay. We're just moving them to another facility. And so, that was for me really the God experience of this process, because I knew one thing when I was in there, is that I was doing the work that was outlined in the steps, and that the experience that came seemed to be something like what was promised. The jail cell didn't fill up with light, and I wasn't struck down to my knees, but something happened. It's like I had some kind of an experience that transformed how I reacted to all the situations of my life. And I started to become a different person. I started to do the stuff. And how did it feel, Teryn, when you and Brycey came to pick me up when they finally let me out? Had you been praying? Did you have a God experience at all?
I didn't. I think it was that scared cautiousness that what's when is the next shoe going to drop, and what's the next thing that's going to happen to us? What is he going to do next to make this not an easy thing? And, listening to you talk about that, in my first time getting sober, I was waiting for one of those experiences, because I had heard you talk about those experiences that you'd had where, you really felt God. And I felt like a failure in my first time being sober, because I didn't have one of those experiences where there was God, or I knew there was God. And I think I had closed myself off even in that first time. I looked like I was doing the right stuff, but I didn't have, since I hadn't had one of those experiences that you hear people talk about, that I'd heard you talk about, I figured I was doing it wrong and it wasn't coming. Whereas this time I've realized that my experiences with God are completely different than your experiences with God. And I can look back now and see my experiences with God during your time then. I think my God is, like Loki, the Norwegian god of like, that's kind of a prankster. That's where my God shows up. And I see those things and it gets me to take a step back and laugh. Like I was mad at you about the cigarettes and having that they were going to have to stay in my car. And if they weren't there, you were going to be mad at me. And then you get locked up and I'm being told you're going to jail for 15 years. But now I look back at it and I can see where my God was working, and that you have this incredible experience while I get to learn about drugs and alcohol in a way that I had never gotten to learn about them before, because you were locked up. So I wasn't worried about you for the first time in my life. And, I got to learn about drugs and alcohol, which was a great time for me. And now I can see that. But my God shows up differently than your God shows up. My God shows up in ways that when I'm quiet or when I'm refusing to see that there is a God, that's when my God is showing up. And I remember when we picked you up, Bryce was over the moon, so excited. And I was, I have a lot of feelings of annoyance when it comes to you in jail, so I'm annoyed that Bryce is so excited, because I'm not. I'm back. I have to give up this fun life I had and go back to dealing with sober dad. And, so I had this, Brycey's so excited. I'm annoyed. But I remember it was seeing something different in you that I hadn't seen before. And then we had that great drive back to California. I don't remember if you remember driving back through the mountains of Arizona, and you were finally teaching me how to drive a stick properly, since the first time you had taught me, you were, I don't know what, in the passenger seat of your stupid ass Viper with a cup of coffee telling me not to spill it. And I remember that was one of my favorite moments with you, was when we drove back to California, and I knew in that drive that you were a changed person. We had a really great time. We listened to good music, and you didn't yell at me once about spilling your coffee. And so, and you didn't tell me that you were going to drive. And that was another new for me. You weren't going to drive. So I knew you were different. And again, cautiousness going forward, that we started getting into the differences of life. But, what about on your side, Dad? Watching both of your daughters spiral around the drain, how do you pray when you're in that kind of thing?
I'm the interviewer. No, those are great. Those are great questions. That's if there's a challenge that I've had, and I've never questioned God though. My typically what I'll do when the fear comes up around, the stuff that you guys get caught up in the the worry, when I get caught up in the late at night, not able to sleep, what I'll do is invite God in, and God will remind me that, that you guys are his kids, not that God doesn't have grandkids. And then I'll do the thing that I learned from Teryn, that I've done this so many times, is I'll do a third step with you guys in the third step, and I'll offer you to God to do with and to build with, and to do, to at some point, hopefully bear witness through you to his power, his love, and his way of his life. I would do that over. And then but the challenge always comes about, I know that what's bothering me is fear. And so I'll do the work around fear, and I'll ask why I have the fear. And the fear is that I can't help the children. And, what's wrong with me? And then I'll recognize that self-reliance has failed me. I get taken back to that place. We're in the world to play the role that God assigns, and just to the extent that we do that as God would have us do, we're on a different basis, trusting and relying upon infinite God rather than finite self. I get to that point, and I'll ask God, to provide me the insight or the connection, or have me meet that person or hear those things that allow me to know what it is that I need to be doing. And even my sponsor Ralph does a really nice job of making it simple for me to understand. He asked me, he always talks about which hat I'm wearing. And, am I wearing the dad hat? Am I wearing the sponsor hat? Am I wearing the fellowship hat? And that helps me to focus because, if I'm wearing the dad hat, I just need to kind of trust that I've invited God into my heart and that God is going to guide me, into being the dad. And I might tend to not do it perfectly. Recently I've been called the great enabler, and that I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, but I'm certainly exploring that as a truth because I feel like my motives are rooted in love and not necessarily manipulation. Recognize I'm clear now about both of my daughters that you guys are of the real variety and that you are hopeless apart from divine help and that I'm not divine. I am human. And that the only thing I can do is try to be available and to be an example. And my prayer this afternoon was, to God make me that space where, healing can take place. And where, in the Jungian, in the Carl Jung world, he talked about a tenemos. And the tenemos is a sacred space where that is safe. And so I just prayed, that God put a seed in me that might grow and flower of safety and healing. Because, we've got a daughter in crisis right now, and Teryn's always about to go into crisis. You're talking about you being cautious.
I am always in crisis.
But
this time around in my sobriety, have you seen a difference?
Oh, absolutely. I've completely seen a difference. I see God working through it. I see God's light, love, power, and way of life shining itself through you. And, I believe it's real because I believe I know where I find God is in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Cocaine Anonymous. And you seem to like to be there. And I think Brycey likes to be there too. And so that gives me hope because, one of our mentors, Howard P., would say, when you have an experience of God, quoting the mystics, return to that place. And the place where I've had the experience of God is in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the faces of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I return to those places and I sit there often because that's where God visited me first and that's where God continues to visit me. And, I know that it's not going to be kind of, the lightning that takes the offering off the altar. But the lame do take up their mats and walk, and the blind do see, and the hopeless alcoholics and the hopeless drug addicts do recover, and they do transform, and they become vital, important pieces in their. I've got a brother that's on here, Denny, and he is a mess. He was a real mess. I could tell a story about 12-stepping him when I was in method, but I won't. I'll save him the trouble.
I think in this format and, talking about God in our lives, it's funny because we do have some good conversations about God now, especially, because my daughter asked so many insightful questions. And since we're getting close to the top of the hour, I'm going to leave you with a question that Elowen asked me at 6:30 this morning because she has no respect for the fact that I'm not a morning person. She's got her Fruit Loops and I'm making her lunch. And I've only had one sip of coffee. Remember this, one sip of coffee at this point. She goes, Mom, I've got a question. And I was like, what do you want, Elowen? And she goes, I was listening to Grandpa talk last night about the God stuff that you guys were talking about. And she goes, and he talks about the planets and how they all came around and how we only are here because of 1 degree hot, 1 degree cold. And I was like, yes, Grandpa was talking about it last night. And she goes, okay, well, so we know how all of that was born. How was God born? I don't know.
That's a great question. And I think what's important, and I'm going to leave it with this, is for me, is the big transformation I've had is I have become less the subject of my life, and God has become more the subject of my life. And my guess is I'll experience complete freedom when God's completely the subject and I'm completely out of the picture. It's just simply another one of the objects in God's universe. The great revelation is all this. That's the first revelation that we were given, was creation. Then after that, we've tried to describe it from whatever culture it's been, in whatever way they've been able to do it, with, scripture, with literature, with ritual, with art, with song, with poetry. All that has been this attempt to describe the great subject, and the great subject is God. And, either God is or he isn't. That's the question. And then if I choose if I answer the question, God is, and that's what I want, then I can start to act that way. Because what I'm talking about is the source, the purpose, the reason, the mechanism by which all that is continues to be. And when I become aware that source, that reason, that purpose is the very thing that is flowing through me at every single moment, at all times, I should never feel anxiety or upset or concern, because God, I know right now that God's will is that we be doing exactly what we're doing here. Every person that's here be doing, because it couldn't be anything other than that. And so that's my job, is to participate with God's will, which is ultimately grace, and try to align myself with what God would have me be in those next moments. And I'm starting to recognize that what Bill wrote in the 12 and 12 at the beginning, the joy of living is the theme, the theme of the 12 step, and actions is key word. It goes on and it says, but when the 12 step is seen in its full implication, what we're really talking about is love that's beyond price. I believe that what God's will is to express love that's beyond price, and that each of us experience it and then be able to give that thing back. I can't give it away if I don't have it, and I can't have it if I live in a way that blocks it from coming in. But if I allow that grace and love to become part of who I am, then it becomes available to the people that God puts in my life. Anyway.
I like that a lot, and I would have to agree. I found my life centers a lot more around talking to God before I do much of anything. And yeah, I'm like you. I have a great sponsor that anytime I bring anything to her, she's, her first thing is, have you, make sure you talk to God. Are you praying? And it's good to be in a, like you said, and I've heard you say it before, that, what we have is because, we have the peace with God, and we have this newfound foundation in God, and giving our control over to God. And then we have this foundation and this fellowship that understands and is there in a way that nobody else could be for people like you and me. Yep. And I think that's a beautiful part of this program.
Raquel, it's all yours.
Oh my God. I was just for those who don't know. Yeah. We're going to get to thank them in a little bit. I was crying since the beginning, Teryn, when you mentioned that when people prayed on Thanksgiving, you felt the presence of God. And through all of this, it was very beautiful to witness the grace of God from the outside, from a father and a daughter, and this whole journey that we have. It was just very beautiful. And it hits me directly. So I thank you, Teryn, for asking. I'm supposed to be asking questions. I'm just participating. It's okay. I thank you for asking your dad about his prayer for you, because I'll take it. So thank you so much. And I am going to pose a question to both of you. And then I just hope that people just can join and ask questions or just say how moved you are from the miracle that happens in AA. This is so beautiful. Anyways, I'll get your number later, Terry. You're very good.
Yes.
I want to know how you pray now, Terry. I want to know. I get the vibe that you are a strong, intense woman with high emotions, and I love the fact that you talk about. Yeah, my God is okay the way that I want to talk to him. I want to know how is that for you today, and the question for Tom. That last closing statement about God being the subject of your life was beautiful. So I just want you to shortly, if you can, just expand on that as well. But I would like you to answer first, Teryn. Go ahead.
I talk to God the way that I've always wanted the ability to talk to the people in my life that matter. I talk to God as if he were my dad or my mom, and it's all day, every day. And then there's the moments in the morning when I wake up and it's like, I'm here. I don't know what you want from me, but could you help me want what you help me want what you want from me? And so there's a lot of that is I need to know, I don't know what you want from me, and I need to want what you want from me. And then at night, it's a lot of gratitude. We have a gratitude wall where every day of the year, we have to write our gratitude. So at night before I close my eyes, it's usually, whew, we did it again. You're not in jail. You're not drunk. Good job, both of us. And, but there's a lot of sarcasm in my conversations with God as well. Is really, this is what I'm doing right now? Cool. Thanks. Great plan on your part. But it's very honest and it's very open.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, that in a short way, what I'm talking about is I have internal conversations going on all the time, and thoughts working. And when I catch myself making myself the subject of the conversation, I know that I'm in a self-centered perspective, and that it's probably going to be flawed, and it's probably going to create anxiety and fear. And so what I try to do is flip the conversation and recognize that God is the subject, and remind myself that I'm only here to do God's will, and that in doing God's will, makes me a free agent and gives me a lot of freedom in how I decide to do that. But ultimately, it's about God's work. That my daughters are not my daughters, but they are God's kids, and that God has placed us in this relationship that we call father-daughter right now, and so there's a certain role I'm supposed to play, but I'm playing it serving God. God, it's as a steward for the gifts that God puts in our lives, including our children in the other relationships.
Oh, that's beautiful. Guys, the floor is open for questions, for comments, for thank yous, for anything. And we're going to get to thank them eventually. But if you have a question or a comment, please just raise your hand so we can unmute you. Okay, Debbie, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Debbie, and I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic. And, I was so moved and so touched by the conversation that a daughter and a father can have. And the fact that some of the things that you were talking about are things that you haven't really talked about. And the thing is, Teryn, I could so relate to you because I was the oldest. So that's never a good place to be when you have alcoholic parents, because then you become a little parent yourself. You're still a little girl trying to understand everything. And everything you said I could relate to. I went to Catholic school as well. And, I was confused and didn't understand. And why does God do these things? And I just so appreciate the fact that you were so open and honest and able to say how you feel, and the fact that you talked a lot about, and I hadn't really thought about it because both of my parents are now deceased. But that word about being confused, how many times I was confused, but you're going in an autopilot because you're confused, but you're still doing something, but you don't know why. And I could just feel it when you talked about going somewhere like driving or going to the prison and how that must have felt for you because, here we go again. Here we go. Why do I have to do this? Like, why is this my responsibility? So to see you and your father come full circle now is it's just such a miracle. And I just want to thank the two of you. The question that I had was basically the one that you just answered. So I just want to thank the two of you.
Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie. Anybody else? A question?
I want to thank so many wonderful people and friends that are on this Zoom. It really is thoughtful to see you guys and especially for this very personal experience.
And I have a message right here. It's like from Ralph. He says, one of the best meetings ever. Please let them know I'm on a train full of people and I'm starting to lose service. He is overwhelmed. I'm just saying. All right, Samantha, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, my room's dark and I'm not very well, but I didn't feel like I could keep my camera off to respond. I agree with what everybody else said. That was so beautiful. I felt so blessed to be here and hear you both share so candidly, so honestly about the journey. And I relate so much of what you said, Teryn. And listening to you, Tom, that I do often get that, what is this but a miracle of healing? That we're so blessed to be here in recovery and experience this growing spiritually and that ever expandingness of that. And yes, your closing comment was, it was like God speaking to me. I know there was something I wanted to say, but I did. I was sitting through this thinking, wow, I get to be here. I get to be here. This is such a blessing. One thing I didn't go through watching my mum and she's 48 years sober. I didn't go through watching her be handcuffed, but there was often police at the wild parties at our house and seeing her wake up with different men all the time, going in to see my mum, and there was a strange guy there, and just all the total chaos when I thought everybody else had the normal families and mums and dads and I didn't have. And when she got sober and alcohol taking away my mum, and then when she got sober, AA took away my mum. But she was all into AA, and I'm like, wait, hang on, we still don't get our mum? And I would have, my sister's not in recovery. I would have loved for her to be here and have heard all that you spoke of the immense responsibility kids take on and all that fear and confusion. And I'm not crying so much of sadness, but of being so touched and feeling so blessed. So thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Any other question or comments? Okay, Colleen, go ahead, please.
Tom and Teryn, thank you so much. This is actually mostly for Teryn. Teryn, when you were speaking and you were talking about your annoyance with your dad, every time he fell, and you remind me a lot of my daughter. Her and I have had these conversations too. She was younger when I sobered up, but what she remembered, because I used to think, oh, how did I affect you? And she said, you just irritated me. Like every time, I drank, I irritated you, and she had zero faith in me. She had zero faith in me, but because I had been in AA and then I had gone back out, although I was still going to meetings. P.S. That doesn't really work. And she didn't have any faith in me. What she had faith in was AA. She felt safe with me in AA meetings around AA people. And I just listening to you talk just reminds me so much of her. And I want to say thank you. And then I'm going to send her a message and let her know how much I love her. I do have, a little bit of a question. How, because it was a long time between the time that you dropped your dad off and the time you got sober. Well, maybe it wasn't a long time because you're only 28, but it was a time, right? It was a time. And so how did you deal with that annoyance in between that time and the time of your sobriety?
So when I realized that he was different and might actually stick, things changed, and he was able to be on his own, and he was able to be a grandfather, and he was when I had my kids and all that stuff. And for me, I really stopped caring about what he was doing. When I'd see him, it was awesome, but I really needed to focus on me and how I was going to do my life. And I talked to him. We talk almost every day, and it was fun. It was good to hear him, and as long as he sounded the same, I wasn't concerned. So it stopped being of concern. And and then the other thing that I would do is, as long as I never snorted cocaine, I never had a problem. And so I just did other things and found other ways to do drugs or drink and do all this stuff. And as long as I didn't have the frozen vodka, then I was fine. So I didn't like vodka, and that was how I justified, my life, and kept him out of it. And that was the best way for me to do it. But, when he was in jail is when I really started becoming a drug addict and an alcoholic, and more, and I had no idea that was what was happening. But, and then I got sober, and then I relapsed for 2.5 years. And during that 2.5 years, there was a lot of shame and anger towards myself and how much of a failure I was. And so that was really a lot of what I worked on when I got sober this time. But yeah, no, I was too absorbed in my own self to really care about his program at that point in time. I liked hearing him talk. I liked going to the conventions, because that was fun. Hear speakers, but it's not like I heard the stories, and I'd hear the message, but I didn't understand until I got sober what I had been given during my addiction and alcoholism.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, guys, we are in that time of the meeting, so I would like, we can stop the recording now, Karen. Thank you. Please unmute and thank our speakers tonight. Please feel free to unmute.
Thank